Hey kangaroos! For this year's Veterans Day observance, we have a presentation made by various groups around LW. DAT has a presentation highlighting Hispanic, Indigenous peoples, women's, and LGBTQ stories. We also have an AAPIC presentation on Asian American and Pacific Islander achievements. Lastly, HOSA has prepared a presentation on the medical personnel in the military. We hope you enjoy the information presented in this year's observance. Thank you. With this presentation and observance of Veterans Day, our intention is to honor the lived experiences and sacrifices of veterans from all backgrounds, and to highlight stories and achievements of historically underrepresented groups and individuals. We acknowledge that we are not able to address all perspectives and narratives. We also recognize the many different experiences and associations related to the military. All reactions are valid, and we welcome all feedback.
7,000 Hispanic volunteers, mostly from the southwestern United States, fought with distinction in the U.S. Army during the Spanish-American War. In 1920, a unit composed of both native-born soldiers, mostly of Mexican descent, and new immigrants from Latin America, Mexico, and Spain, was redesignated as the 65th Infantry Regiment and served as the U.S. military's last segregated unit composed primarily of Hispanic soldiers. In World War II, these soldiers earned 1 Distinguished Service Cross, 2 Silver Stars, and 2 Bronze Stars, and 90 Purple Hearts. Approximately 400,000 to 500,000 Hispanic service members served in the U.S. Armed Forces during World War.
Hall of Fame. Seaman Philip Azar was the first Hispanic Congressional Medal of Honor recipient for his service for the Navy during the Civil War. Major Marisol Chalice was commanded Army Reserve Fleet. She has served 26 years in a reserve and is currently an Army Congressional Fellow. Admiral David Farragut was the first person to achieve the rank of Admiral. He served in the Navy for 60 years, including the War of 1812. Sergeant First Class Agustin Ramos Calero was a soldier of the 65th Infantry Regiment. He received 22 medals, among them the Silver Star. General Richard E. Cavazos became the first Brigadier General in 1976 and the first Hispanic 4-star general in 1982. Captain Manuel John Fernandez Jr. became the first Hispanic pilot to reach Flying A status during the Korean War.
Latinos representation has been highest in the Marine Corps. Latino representation in the Navy has also been rising. By September 2006, they constituted 14% of Navy enlisted personnel. Latinos have caught up and even slightly surpassed Latinos in their gender's representation in the military. Hispanics in the Army, a rather diverse group, are largely immigrants or the children of immigrants. Just 39% of Hispanic respondents were born in the United States to U.S.-born parents.
Here is an infographic of Hispanics/Latinos in the Defense Department. We thank you for your service.
Hi, my name is Andia Kaufman, and today I'll be talking about women in the military as a way to honor them for this Veterans Day. Though not originally involved in our country's combative history, women first started playing a role from 1917 to 18 as World War I was occurring. They were finally allowed to participate in the form of nurses and care staff, and around 33,000 were involved in this way. Similarly, from 1941 to 45, over 400,000 served at home and provided non-combative support. This was crucial because women were allowed to fight for themselves, essentially. They were allowed to take care of themselves, allowed to be involved in factories and jobs where traditionally it would be only men. And so in doing this, they proved themselves as viable members of society as opposed to just housewives. And the Women's Armed Services Integration Act of 1948 finally allowed women to receive veteran benefits and status in the Navy, Marine Corps, Army, and Air Force. Under President Gerald Ford's Public Law 94-106 of 1975, women were allowed to enroll as students in the U.S. military academies for the first time in history. The following year, hundreds of women were found in the academies, and by 1994, statements addressing the risk of military involvement were changed to include both men and women. Moving into the present day, in 2009, the first all-women Marine Corps team was assembled for combat in Afghanistan. They succeeded, and by 2013, all positions were made accessible to both men and women. Now, in the year 2020, the presence of women in the military has increased more than ever before, and the people of just a century ago could have never believed the progress that has been achieved. There are over 200,000 women in just combative positions alone, and while this is about 11% of the current population of military, women are now allowed to fill spots once accessible to only men, and the rate of them in the military is growing as days go by. They have made an immense difference and are deserving of recognition and honor this Veterans Day. Some key figures involved in revolutionizing today's view of women are Lieutenant General Patricia Hiroho in the top left. She provided care during the 9/11 attacks and created more inclusive policies to ensure veterans received health care and recognition which they deserved. Margaret Woodward, in the top right, became the first woman to lead an air-based military mission in Libya in 2011. She is also a major advocate against sexual assault and has brought much awareness to the unfortunately common issue in the military. Annie G. Fox, in the bottom right, was born in 1893 and was the first woman to receive a Purple Heart Award. She was the head nurse of the Station Hospital at Hickam Field in Hawaii in 1941 and was crucial in World War II and providing soldiers who were healthy and ready to fight. Sergeant Leanne Hester, in the bottom left, successfully led her troops through Surprise Attack Zone in March of 2007. All these women share the fact that they were brave and courageous, and they had the goal of setting up a future in which all those who sought to participate in the military could, and a future in which women were respected and recognized for their work and achievements. This is why it's so crucial that this Veterans Day we honor their hard work and use it to move forward.
Indigenous peoples in the military. The indigenous population served in the armed forces at 5 times the national average. Their service goes back to the Revolutionary and Civil Wars, where they served in higher percentages than any other ethnicity. There are currently 31,000 active duty Indigenous members and 133,000 veterans, 11.7% being female. Code talkers were Indigenous people who transmitted messages and codes built upon their native languages. And with the multitude of different tribes in the United States, no language or code used were the same. It is estimated that more than 30 tribes served as code talkers, in addition to the most widely known Navajo tribe. Peter MacDonald, Navajo tribal chairman and Army veteran, served in the U.S. Marine Corps in World War II as a Navajo code talker. He enlisted at age 15. More recently, Lori Pistua, a Hopi tribal member, was an Iraq War veteran and was the first Indigenous woman to die in combat. She received the Purple Heart and the Prisoner of War Medal.
A brief history of LGBTQ+ in the military. In 1994, the Don't Ask, Don't Tell policy was put into place by then-President Bill Clinton, which prevented openly lesbian, gay, and bisexual service members from serving in the military. 18 years later, in 2010, Congress repealed this policy, which went into effect on September 20th, 2011. Current policy and changes. In 2013, the Supreme Court struck down Section 3 of the Defense of Marriage Act, or DOMA, and extended spousal and family benefits to same-sex married partners in the military. This means that openly gay service members who were given an other than honorable discharge from the military would be given access to the customary veteran services and benefits, including medical care, financial compensation, pensions, or financial college support. After ending temporarily in 2016, the ban on transgender individuals was again rescinded in 2021, allowing those who don't identify with their biological gender to enlist and serve in the armed forces. Although the trauma caused by the military's decades-long policy of discrimination against LGBTQ+ people cannot be erased, steps are being taken to begin addressing the pain that such policies have created. Here are some of the many LGBTQ+ military heroes. Colonel Margaret Kammermeyer is one of the highest-ranking openly LGBTQ members of the military. Prior to Don't Ask, Don't Tell, she was open about her sexuality and won the right to serve. Technical Sergeant Leonard P. Matlovich, a Vietnam War veteran, was the first person to purposely out himself. He did so on the cover of Time magazine in 1975 as a challenge to the military's policy against LGBTQ persons. Kristen Beck is a former U.S. Navy SEAL who procured a lot of attention in 2013 when she came out as a transgender woman. Her story has helped shape current policies towards inclusivity of the transgender community. In this presentation, we'd like to highlight the achievements and contributions of Asian American and Pacific Islander veterans.
While Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders have never been a majority group in the U.S. military, they have made significant contributions to the country. AAPI have served in the U.S. military since 1812. While there have been many notable AAPI groups in the military, there is one group in particular who went above and beyond. During World War II, Japanese Americans were placed in internment camps. Some Japanese Americans wished to fight for the American military, and they were known as the Nisei. There were about 5,000 Nisei who served in World War II, but now there are only 4 known Nisei veterans who are still alive. Since World War II, the amount of Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders in the U.S. military has grown. In World War II, there were more than 25,000 Japanese Americans who fought for the U.S. military. Today, there are about 53,000 AAPI members serving the Army, and while that number might seem like a lot, it only makes up 3.8% of the entire military. In the U.S., there are about 16,000 Filipino veterans, 20,000 Chinese veterans, 27,000 Pacific Islander, 33,000 Japanese, 150,000 Native American and Indian, and many more that were not included in this list. Of the Asian American and Pacific Islander veterans, 1 out of 3 of them are 65 years old or older.
The 442nd Regimental Combat Team was an all-Japanese unit in the American Army. After Pearl Harbor, Japanese men wanted to join the war effort. 10,000 Hawaiian men volunteered, and 1,182 mainland Nisei volunteered. Nisei are second-generation Japanese immigrants. Then, when internment began, 1,100 more men from the mainland volunteered. The team was activated February 1, 1943, and was comprised of about 2/3 men from Hawaii and 1/3 men from the mainland. They were eventually combined with another Nisei unit, the 100th Infantry Battalion. The 442nd's motto was "Go for broke." Originally, it was Hawaiian gambling slang, and it means to risk everything in an all-out effort. This reflects that the 442nd were often given the riskiest missions. The 442nd is the most decorated unit of its size in U.S. history. About 18,000 men served, and they got 9,846 Purple Hearts, 21 Medals of Honor, and 7 Presidential Unit citations. The 442nd are truly remarkable because they fought even as their families were being interned, and they really contributed to the war effort.
The 1st Filipino Battalion, formed on March 4th, 1942, and activated on April 1st at Camp San Luis in California. Filipinos had petitioned for the right to serve after the attack on Pearl Harbor. On January 2nd, 1942, President Roosevelt signed a law that allowed Filipinos to serve. The battalion had reached over 2,000 men by the end of May 1942.
Sunita L. Williams was a U.S. Navy officer turned astronaut. She's the 5th most experienced spacewalker ever, and graduated from the U.S. Naval Academy before working as a Navy test pilot. Then later on, she was recruited by NASA to be an astronaut and to fly to the ISS. She's been awarded many medals throughout her career, and one of the most notable being the Humanitarian Service Medal, awarded by the U.S. military.
General Viet Xuan Long is the first Vietnamese-born general flag officer in the U.S. military. Long's nearly 27-year military career stemmed from his experience on the deck of the USS Hancock, when at 9 years old he escaped Vietnam with his family in 1975. His journey to the U.S. was part of Operation Frequent Wind, a mission to help rescue Vietnamese citizens from the country during the final days of the Vietnam War. Reflecting back on this experience, he says, "People might not believe that, but I knew right back then that I wanted to serve our country." Long achieved the rank of Brigadier General August 8, 2014 at Fort Hood, Texas.
Susan Ahn Cuddy was the first Asian American woman to serve in the military. She was born January 16, 1915 and died June 24, 2016. She felt that joining the Army was a way to free Korea from the Japanese colonial rule. She served 1942 to 1946 during World War II. After she received the rank of lieutenant, she went on to work for the U.S. Navy Intelligence in the Library of Congress. There, she was in charge of a think tank of over 300 agents during the Cold War. She worked on many other secret projects for the Department of Defense and other agencies during her service with the United States government until 1959. She's also the sister of Philip Ahn, who is an Asian American pioneer actor and one of the most recognized Asian American actors of all time. I hope that you enjoyed today's presentation brought to you by LWHS, or Asian American Pacific Islander Coalition. I hope you learned something new about AAPI veterans in the military. A lot of them achieved incredible things, and it's been our pleasure to tell you about these members of our community.
Veterans Day, originally known as Armistice Day to celebrate the peace treaty signed between the Allies and the Germans to end World War I, is a day to honor military veterans who have served and protected the United States. Today, we want to honor our veterans by giving you a glimpse into the unsung heroes of the battlefield, medics. To talk about the history of combat medics, we have to start at the beginning, with arguably the most influential medic in American history, Clara Barton.
Clara Barton, born Clarissa Harlow Barton, was born in North Oxford, Massachusetts in 1821. She began her illustrious career as an educator, but found her true calling tending wounded soldiers on and off the bloody Civil War battlefields. Her most notable appearance was at the infamous Battle of Antietam, the deadliest one-day battle in all of American military history. Working long into the night assisting the surgeons, cooking food for the soldiers, and tending to the wounded, Barton made a profound impression on the Union Army surgeons. Dr. James Dunn said of Barton, "In my feeble estimation, General McClellan, with all his laurels, sinks into insignificance beside the true heroine of the age, the angel of the battlefield." However, the effect Clara Barton would have on the rest of military history was far from over. In 1869, Barton traveled to Europe and learned about the International Red Cross, which had just established an agreement known as the Geneva Treaty, which laid out rules for the care of the sick and wounded in wartime. After Barton returned to the United States, she petitioned for America to enter the Geneva Treaty. In 1882, President Chester Arthur signed the treaty, and the American Association of the Red Cross, later called the American Red Cross, was born.
The American Red Cross's first introduction came with the outbreak of World War I. The Red Cross staffed hospital and ambulance companies and recruited 20,000 registered nurses to serve the military. In terms of the war effort, their functions fell into 4 categories: service to the American Armed Forces, service to the Allied military force, particularly the French, limited service to American and Allied prisoners of war, and service to civilian victims of war, with an emphasis on the children of Europe. Numerous nurses served at frontline casualty clearing stations, or forward units. In August 1917, U.S. Army nurse Beatrice McDonald, on duty at a casualty clearing station, came under enemy fire during an air raid, and fragments of shrapnel from a bomb sliced through her eye. After being evacuated, McDonald refused orders to go home, simply stating, "I have just started doing my bit." With only one eye, McDonald remained on duty in France until after the armistice and was awarded the Distinguished Service Cross. Thousands of nurses put their lives at stake while working to stabilize wounded soldiers for evacuation. After the war, the Red Cross focused on service to veterans and enhanced its programs in safety training, accident prevention, home care for the sick, and nutrition education. Additionally, Red Cross nurses came forward to combat the worldwide influenza epidemic of 1918.
The Second World War called upon the Red Cross to provide extensive services once again to the U.S. military, allies, and civilian war victims. American Red Cross workers provided assistance to all servicemen and women wherever they were stationed or deployed at home and overseas. Each battalion of 400 to 500 American soldiers would have about 30 medics. They were trained to stop bleeding, apply dressing, sprinkle sulfa powder on wounds as an antiseptic, and to administer morphine as a sedative. While on the topic of combat medics during World War II, some of you may have heard the story of this next medic. On April 1, 1945, 180,000 U.S. Army and U.S. Marine Corps troops descended on the Pacific island of Okinawa for a final push towards Japan. As they moved inland, American troops wondered when and where they'd finally encounter enemy resistance. What they didn't know was the Japanese Imperial Army had them just where they wanted them. Casualties were enormous on both sides as the Imperial Army unleashed the full force of their military might. But the American Army persevered and eventually made it to the Maida Escarpment, also known as Hacksaw Ridge. As American troops climbed the summit, a heavy concentration of artillery, mortar, and machine gun fire crashed into them, causing approximately 75 casualties and driving the others back. However, medic Desmond D. Doss refused to seek cover and remained in the line of fire, carrying his wounded comrades one by one to the edge of the cliff and lowering them down on a rope-supported stretcher. From May 2nd to May 21st, Private First Class Doss remained in exposed territory, rescuing 75 of his wounded comrades and eventually receiving the Medal of Honor for his heroic actions.
Although the world wars were over, combat medics were far from obsolete. They continued to provide services to members of the armed forces in the Korean, Vietnam, and Gulf Wars. In more recent conflicts, combat medics have served tours in war-torn areas like Iraq and Afghanistan. However, in modern warfare, trauma care has evolved to meet the needs of different types of battles and casualties. Combat physicians and nurses often perform surgeries right on the battlefield. Putting their lives at risk, combat nurses need not only strong medical skills and knowledge, but the ability to adapt immediately to whatever circumstances occur. From combat medics to soldiers, they all served in various ways to protect and serve. We hope you take this day to acknowledge and honor all those veterans who fought with the willingness to sacrifice themselves for the common good.
Thank you for watching this year's Veterans Day video. If you have any feedback or comments you would like to share with us, please feel free to do so at the Microsoft forum listed below. Thank you.